I always hate to correct a rabbi, but I have to correct a rabbi. When he said that, that no one is a better defender of Israel, he's wrong. Erwin Koller. Prime Minister Netanyahu said to me, I've decided who I want to be Israel's representative to the United Nations. I want the most eloquent defender of Israel to be our person at the United Nations. I said, so you picked Erwin. And he said, no, I couldn't pick Erwin because he's a parliamentarian in Canada, and so he picked me as second best. So I'm happy to be second best to Erwin. In fact, I'm always thrilled when people refer to me as the United States' Erwin Koller. We had a little buffet before, and a number of people came over and introduced themselves and said that they were related to me. It was very nice. When I was in the phase of my case that the introducer gently referred to as the O.J. Simpson case, my mother always referred to it as the Oy vey O.J. phase. In my career, people would deny being related to me even if their name was Dershowitz. They'd say it's a common name, who knows? I'm talking about my mother. And so, you know, you can be controversial in lots of different ways. Tonight, I hope some of the controversy will result from what I'm really looking forward to, the exchange of views between Erwin Koller and myself. Erwin and I go back 45 years. And we've been, we were born at the hip, attached at the hip, and we are inseparable in our views and in our love for each other and in our love for Israel. So let me start by talking about Israel. I'm going to throw out a challenge. Can anybody think of any country in the world that has contributed so much to the welfare of the world in 63 years as Israel has done? It's just impossible to imagine any country that has given so much to the world, that has cured so much illness, that has developed so much medical technology. I mean, Israel has saved more Arab and Muslim lives with its medical technology than all the Arab and Muslim countries in the world. Israel has contributed enormously to environmental technology. Its strip agriculture has saved lives, millions and millions of lives, by providing food in parts of the world that would otherwise not have food. Israel's high-tech industries fuel the world economy. People talk about boycotting Israeli products. Yeah, you can imagine what the world would look like without Israeli products. There wouldn't be cell phones, there wouldn't be computers, there wouldn't be so many things that we take for granted today. Israel's high-tech startups. Think of what that's done for the world economy, for jobs at a time when jobs are so hard to come by in so many parts of the world. Israel has had more startups than all of Europe. Israel has had more patents than most of the rest of the world, more Nobel Prizes than most countries of Europe in its 63 years. And I think many people recognize that. What people often don't recognize is Israel has also helped fight the war against terrorism in a way that really serves as a model for democracies. It has helped strike the appropriate balance between how to fight terrorism without diminishing civil liberties. And is that a gift to the world? My mentor and great friend was a great justice of the United States Supreme Court called William J. Brennan, probably the most liberal justice in American history. And at my suggestion, the suggestion of a number of people, he went to Israel in the last years of his life, and he was invited there by President Harward of the Supreme Court. And he came away with a glowing report, which he published. He said, if terrorism ever comes to the United States, this is before 9/11, there is only one country in the world to which the United States could look for how to fight the war against terrorism without diminishing civil liberties. And that country is the Jewish nation of Israel. Israel has taught the world how to engage in civil liberties and civil rights in a diverse population, while bringing in people from all over the world. It has created equality, not perfect equality, but better equality than almost any other country in the world with so diverse a population. And finally, it has given the Middle East the rule of law. It's the only country in the Middle East that honors the rule of law. And when I've spoken to leaders in the Middle East, when they speak to me in candid moments, whether it be the leaders of Jordan, the leaders of Egypt, they will tell me that they admire Israel for its rule of law. When a poll was taken recently among Palestinians, and they asked, which country's judiciary would you like to emulate most when you establish a state? Many thought it would be the United States, and the answer was Israel. Why Israel? Because in the United States, it's not easy to get before the courts. The United States Supreme Court constantly rejects cases, says there's no standing, it's not ripe, it's not a case of controversy. There are all kinds of barriers to adjudication. For example, we've never adjudicated the legality of holding prisoners in Guantanamo. It's never been adjudicated by a United States Supreme Court because of the standing issues. In Israel, every case gets before the court. A peasant from a Bedouin area can bring a case. A Palestinian can bring a case. And the Israel Supreme Court will listen to the case. No judiciary in the world is as open to litigation. And no judiciary in the world rules as often against its own government, much to the criticism of many Israelis, as the Israeli Supreme Court. And yet, the director of Human Rights Watch recently told the founder of Human Rights Watch, my friend Robert Bernstein, who founded Human Rights Watch, the director of Human Rights Watch recently said to him, oh, the Israeli Supreme Court, they're under the thumb of the government. It's just absurd. There is no court that is less under the thumb. It's under the skin of the government. The government gets very angry at the Israeli Supreme Court. When I go to Israel and have dinners with the leaders of the Israeli government, they rail against the Supreme Court. How dare they intrude? How dare they tell the military what they can do in the middle of a battle? Only the Israeli Supreme Court intrudes in the military operations of an IDF that is defending the lives of its citizens and says to the Israeli military, you must strike a balance. Yes, it may be the most effective thing to do to take a Palestinian and stand in front of him and use what's called the neighbor policy to make sure that nobody shoots at your soldiers, but you cannot do that under Israeli law. Yes, you can build a security barrier, but it must not infringe on the rights of the Palestinians. Every dunam of the barrier must be justified by military necessity and not political expediency. No, you can't hold prisoners from Lebanon as hostages to exchange them for Jewish or Israeli prisoners, even though the saving of prisoners is the highest concept in Jewish law. The Israeli Supreme Court said, no, we can't do what they do. We can't do what they have done to Gilad Shalit. We can't do what they've done to other prisoners. Israel holds itself to a higher standard. People say to me all the time, but you say, and I do say, that Israel is not obligated to follow the international law of the International Court of Justice. They're not. Israel's not part of the International Court of Justice. They've never served on it. No taxation without representation, no compliance without representation. It's like a black person not having a moral obligation to comply with the rulings of an apartheid court in South Africa or the United States South. But that doesn't mean that Israel doesn't comply with international law. Israel not only complies with international law, it is on the forefront of developing international law through its own domestic courts. Some of Aaron Barak's decisions and some of the decisions of the current Supreme Court are the leading decisions in international law. Take, for example, the issue that the United States has now borrowed, NATO has now borrowed from Israel, the idea of targeted killings of enemy combatants. What could be a more moral thing to do than to focus on the one enemy, the person who's the head of the Taliban, the person who's the head of Al-Qaeda, and go and find just him and kill him? What the United States did to Osama bin Laden was totally and completely moral and just. He was the murderer. He is a combatant. They didn't touch his children. They didn't touch his wives. They just went after him. Where did they learn that from? They learned it from Israel. Israel developed targeted killing because they didn't want to do what other countries do, untargeted killing. Just dropping bombs and killing lots and lots of people. It's interesting that Barack Obama was given the option with Osama bin Laden of dropping a 30-ton bomb from a drone which would have had a 100% certainty of killing Osama bin Laden, but it would have killed other people as well. And he said, no, we're going to risk the lives of American SEALs to go in there and be focused and specific and make sure we have the right person. That was all developed from Israel. Now, what is the law? There's only one place you can look to find out what is the law of targeted assassination. It's the last opinion rendered by President Aaron Barak before he retired from office. And he wrote an opinion that's very tough, that says you can only target somebody if they meet certain very daunting criteria. They have to be ongoing terrorists, they have to be actively involved in terrorism, they can't have been a terrorist in the past, there has to be no opportunity to capture them realistically. In fact, the United States may conceivably have violated that principle if they had an opportunity to capture Osama bin Laden. Nobody knows the actual facts, and I'm not going to criticize the SEALs for having done what they did, but under Israeli law, that might have gone a bit too far if there was an opportunity to capture a combatant. So Israel has given the world so much. What has it gotten in return? It is absolutely amazing. There is no country in the world that has a lower ratio of respect to deserved respect than Israel. It should be praised all over the world. Everybody should celebrate Israel's birthday and Israel's birth. No country has ever been born in law as well as Israel has. Almost every other country in the world was born in violence. The United States, either in violence or in taking land away from other people unlawfully. In the United States, we had a violent revolution. In Canada and many other countries, land was taken from native populations, from Aboriginal populations. Israel was born in law. It was born early on in the Balfour Declaration and the declarations of the League of Nations and the recognition by 7 parliaments throughout the world in a UN series of resolutions, starting with the division and then recognition of the state of Israel. Israel was born in law, and there's never been a country with a more lawful certificate of birth than the nation of Israel. And yet, all over the world, there are calls for delegitimation of Israel. When Israel does something that anybody disagrees with, the first response is, oh, it doesn't deserve to be a country. That's the only country in the world to which that's the response. Even The Guardian, some years ago, said, we don't approve of Israel's security barrier. It raises questions about Israel's ability really to be a country. That's an absurd non sequitur. And I'm talking now about the rational part of the criticism of Israel. Think for a minute about the irrational hatred that's directed at Israel. Does any country in the world have such irrational hatred directed at it? Erwin and I were very active in the anti-apartheid movement. We both helped represent Nelson Mandela when he was in prison. And I was always on the barricades campaigning against South Africa, the apartheid regime of South Africa. I do not remember irrational hatred directed against South Africa that is in any way comparable to the irrational hatred today directed against Israel. Yes, young people were outraged at apartheid. Young people were outraged at the way Mandela was treated. Young people were outraged at the murders that were being done in the name of apartheid. But I never remember the kind of almost eroticized hatred that one sees directed at Israel. Just give you a couple of personal experiences in my own life. A few years ago, I was given some award by some organization in Boston, and it was in Faneuil Hall, the birthplace of American democracy. And I proudly walked down the steps with my little trophy. And I was greeted at the beginning of the steps by a crowd of people who were really, really threatening me. By the way, they were mostly white, Anglo-Saxon. I didn't see any people who looked like they were Muslim. There were no black people. There may have been some Jewish people. I couldn't tell. But they were all white. They were college students. And the police said to me, Alan, you have to be taken out of here. These people will tear you apart. They will kill you. The hatred in their eyes, the rabid nature, and they genuinely felt it. They thought I was the incarnation of evil. They thought I was the worst human being in the world because my sin was I support Israel. And I'm a moderate on Israel. I support the two-state solution. I've been opposed to the occupation since 1973. I'm basically on the left when it comes to Israel. But because I support Israel's right to defend itself, because I believe that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, and it has a right to use proportional means to defend its population. I am the devil incarnate to these young people. Their hatred of me is genuine, just as the hatred by the students in the University of Berlin in 1933 directed at the Jewish faculty and the Jewish students. It was a genuine hatred. It was not fake. It was not because somebody told them to show that they're angry. They genuinely believed it, and that's what's so dangerous. I'm not suggesting that everybody who expresses these views genuinely believes them. I can't believe that Bishop Tutu actually thinks that Israel is an apartheid state. Bishop Tutu has a real problem. He's a bigot. He's an anti-Semite. He doesn't like Jews. He doesn't like the Jewish state. His most recent entry into the gutter is when he publicly stated just a few days ago that the criticism of Islam done by many people, and he was pointing a finger, is comparable to what the Nazis did to the Jews. He loves to turn it around that way, never saying a word about Islamic criticism of Israel, which originates in Nazism, which originates in the Muslim Brotherhoods, which was an affiliation of the Nazi Party. He never criticizes Islam. Never once did he mention how the Palestinian movement originated with Hajj al-Husseini, who became an ally of Hitler during the Second World War in Berlin. But he has no hesitation in calling Israel an apartheid regime and calling those who criticize Islam or criticize many in Islam and comparing them to Nazis. It is remarkable to me that Bishop Tutu today is regarded as a paragon of virtue by many in the world, including the President of the United States, who gave him the Medal of Freedom, and claimed not to be aware of his incredible bigotry, his Holocaust minimization, his claim that Jews are unchristian in their treatment of Palestinians. I forget who the commentator was recently, who said, some years ago, said Israel's the only country in the world that's expected to be more Christian than the Christian nations of the world. And this is Bishop Tutu, using terms like apartheid. He should know better, and he does know better. Jimmy Carter knows better. In fact, when you talk to him personally, he'll say, Israel's not an apartheid country. That's not what I said in my book. Sure, it's in the title, but it's not in the book. You know, and I said to President Carter, with all due respect to you, many, many more people have seen the title and have read the book. And he said, well, you have to understand, I didn't say Israel itself is an apartheid country. What I said was that if the occupation of the West Bank doesn't end, the West Bank will become like apartheid. And he was asked by Stuart Eisenstock before the book was published, please, Mr. President, change the title. Please, more people will read it, you'll get bigger impact, and you won't create tensions that are unnecessary with the pro-Israel and Jewish community. And he adamantly refused to change the title, even though we had the time to do it. This was a clear decision by Jimmy Carter to, again, get into the gutter and play the worst kind of ethnic politics. It's not surprising that Jimmy Carter is the only prominent American politician today who strongly supports the Palestinian quest for recognition at the United Nations without the need for the Palestinians to negotiate or do anything in return. Jimmy Carter also has never met an Israeli he liked. Read the book. And you'll see, he didn't like Rabin, he didn't like Golda Meir, she was too arrogant for him, but Yasser Arafat, wow, he had the best time of his life, bouncing Yasser Arafat's child on his knees, hugging Sarah, who was at the time hiding $3 billion of Palestinian money and stealing it from our own people. But you can't get Jimmy Carter to say a word against any Arab country. You know, his Carter Center tries to bring democracy to the world, except to the Arab world. They never would criticize Saudi Arabia because that's where he gets his money. That's where he gets his funding for the Carter Center. So you don't find any criticism. He puts his arm around a man named Zaid, who runs the Zaid Foundation for Saudi Arabia. This is my dear friend. It's a Holocaust denier. A man who overtly